We are doing cause and effect today. We are going to do critical reasoning, cause and effect, because it's much easier to do the examples that way. But the premise of cause and effect will apply to reading comp as well as you get more familiar with like analyzing the arguments and cause and effect relationships. It does carry over quite a bit, but all of today's examples will be critical reasoning questions. Let's get started. Here are some important considerations to keep in mind when you run into a cause and effect relationship on the GMAT. Anytime an author presents a cause and effect relationship in critical reasoning, they are assuming that the cause and effect relationship is actually correct. That seems very obvious, but I just like to say it to make sure that we are all on the same page. Because anything that they write, they assume it's correct. Like they think that their premises lead to their conclusion. It is our job to poke holes in that. Just happened. And that there is no valid alternative explanation for what they have observed. So this is kind of a big component of cause and effect. They assume that if they present a cause and they present an effect, that is what's going on. And that is where you are able to kind of question the argument or strengthen it. So lots of things are happening all the time. That doesn't make them related. This is the whole basis of cause and effect arguments. There are things happening all the time everywhere. Cause and effect arguments are often prone to sequencing errors. So if they think that A causes B, it could be the other way around and B could cause A. Co-occurrence, things just happen at the same time. And in the case of co-occurrence, a lot of times there might be like a third variable that causes both. And correlation and causation, which is similar, but again, very important to cause and effect. That just because two things happen, even like repeatedly together, that does not mean that there is a causal relationship. So we are going to do the examples like we usually do. We will do 2 minutes a piece. And then we will talk through them. So I'll give you some time to solve them. You can drop your answers into the chat or however you want to do it. And then we will talk through the problem and we'll address specific questions typically about the questions during the questions. But if you think of something later, that's not a big deal. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end just to talk about general questions about the GMAT. So let's see. Oh, you haven't started studying verbal. Okay, it'll be an exciting time for you. Let's start here. I'm going to give you guys 2 minutes. Okay. Many states relaxed their fireworks laws 2 years ago by allowing a wider variety of fireworks to be sold. A recent study found that the number of severe fireworks-related burns among minors has increased in those states over the past 2 years. Given these findings, some people are urging lawmakers to roll back the recent relaxations in the fireworks laws, saying that the relaxations are responsible for the increase in severe burns. Which of the following, if true, most strengthens the people's position? Let's look at our breakdown. So 2 years ago, the states have relaxed their fireworks laws and allowed a wider variety of fireworks to be sold. Since then, the number of severe fireworks-related burns among minors has increased in the states that relaxed their fireworks laws. And the people think that the relaxed laws are responsible for the increase in severe burns, and they're asking lawmakers to roll back those relaxations. So it's very important in cause and effect to be clear on what the cause and effect are. If you don't at least hammer that out, then they will often throw answers in there that are almost like an answer to the cause and effect, but it doesn't address your cause and effect. So be aware of that. And so I have done this for these examples to illustrate what I'm talking about. Let's look at our answer choices. The variety of fireworks recently allowed to be sold doesn't include more powerful fireworks. So that one removes a strengthener. If it did allow more powerful fireworks, then that could be strengthening the law, but it does not include more powerful fireworks. So that one's not terribly helpful. The fireworks companies have expanded their distribution in the last 2 years to reach areas that were not catered to by any fireworks company before. That is interesting. So I would say that that's a tempting answer, except for the relationship isn't clear enough, because we don't know. I mean, where are they expanding? Are they getting more sales? That isn't clear. So that one's not terrible, but I don't like how vague the effect it has on the argument is. C. Some of the states that relaxed their fireworks laws did not see an increase in the number of fireworks sold. Okay. Some is just not enough information. That could be like one of the states. And that it could still be the case, given C, that the recent relaxations in the fireworks laws have led to these increase in firework related damage to minors. And so whether some of the states did or did not see an increase is just not specific enough to be helpful. D, the study also found that the number of, typically don't do the annotation. The study also found that the number of severe fireworks related burns in adults neither increased nor decreased over the past 2 years. We're not talking about that. We're talking about minors. So this is information about a different thing, a closely related thing, but not our thing. And E, states that did not relax their fireworks laws did not see an increase in the number of severe fireworks related burns among minors. So there are a few different ways that we can strengthen a cause and effect answer. One of them is this. We can take away the cause and see if the effect still happens. And if it doesn't, then the cause and effect is strengthened. If it did still happen, so states that did not relax their fireworks laws did still see an increase in the number of severe fireworks related burns among minors, that would weaken the argument, because then we're experiencing the effect without the cause. So I'm liking E. Yes. So if you remove the cause and the effect does not happen, then that strengthens the relationship between the cause and effect. How do we feel about that? Pretty easy. I think we mostly agreed on the answer. Do we have any other questions about that? All right. Let's look at our next example. Okay. To help its citizens avoid experiencing heart disease, 9 years ago, the government of Sudan imposed a tax on the sale of any product containing more than 10 grams of refined sugar per serving. Since then, purchases of products containing more than 10 grams of refined sugar per serving have declined by 13%, and the incidence of heart disease in Sudan has decreased by 10%. The health minister of Sudan has declared the tax a resounding success, claiming that it must be responsible for the decrease in the incidence of heart disease, which of the following, if true, most undermines the support for the health minister's conclusion. Let's look at our breakdown. So, the government imposed this tax on the sale of any product containing over 10 grams of sugar, refined sugar, 9 years ago. Since the tax was imposed, purchases of such refined sugar-rich products have declined by 13%, and the incidence of heart disease in Sudan has also decreased by 10%. So the health minister claims that the tax must be responsible for the decrease in the incidence of heart disease. The health minister's cause and effect here is the refined sugar tax led to a decrease in the rate of heart disease in Sudan. Let's look at our answers. Some people in Sudan currently consume more products that are high in refined sugar than they were consuming before the new tax was enacted. Yes, again, some people, not super helpful. How many people is that? Is that like 3? That the tax could still be a resounding success even if some people are consuming more products that are high in refined sugar than they were consuming before. B, Sudan's who stopped purchasing the newly taxed products developed heart disease at the same rate as the general population. So, we are looking for a weakener because we're trying to undermine support for the conclusion. And this one shows that when the cause happened, the effect did not. So B does weaken the argument. C, since the tax was enacted, retail sales of refined sugar itself have not declined significantly in Sudan. This is a classic trap answer because it seems to argue with the premise that there has been a decline in the purchases of products containing more than 10 grams of refined sugar per serving. So this says that retail sales of refined sugar itself have not declined, but we're not really talking about that. And it's also a bit argumentative towards the premise, which we do not like because premises are always true. So that's a good question. I will get to that in a minute. 10 years ago, the government of Sudan imposed a tax on foods containing trans fats, but since then, the incidence of trans fat-related health problems has not declined. So, again, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about specifically these products that contain more than 10 grams of refined sugar per serving, trans fats out of scope. And E, since the time when the tax on products containing more than 10 grams of sugar per serving was enacted, the inflation-adjusted effect of the tax has declined. It could still be the case that the tax was a resounding success, even if the inflation-adjusted effect of the tax has declined, because say the tax was, 10%? And so say the tax was like 10% and the inflation adjusted effect of it is now down to 8%. Well, that's still 8% more than they would spend. So the fact that it declined does not mean that it's having no effect. So I believe we like B. To this question, should we automatically reject choices with words like some, few, most, etc.? No. It is more that you have to understand specifically what words mean. The GMAT uses words very literally. So in the case of a word like some, that can mean anywhere from 1 to 100%. So just be aware of that. Whereas few means like 3, typically. And most means more than 50%. So be very aware of these words because we use words colloquially a lot, and that might not be how the GMAT is using them. That is the main takeaway there. Just be very literal when you read things. So let's see. Yep, the argument is weakened by showing a time when the cause, the tax discouraging purchases, occurred, and the effect, lower heart disease, did not follow. So this is the opposite of the last one, because the last one removed the cause and then the effect didn't happen, and this one has the cause, but the effect did not follow. So let's look at another example, and I will give you guys a couple minutes and I'll check in before I start reviewing. Okay, how's everyone feeling? Ready to review? All right. Studies have shown that the higher the average level of education of members of a society, the fewer children are had on average by members of that society. Clearly, then, we can slow population growth by improving access to education. Which of the following, if true, does the most to confirm the above conclusion? So, let's see here. Higher average level of education in a society is inversely correlated with the number of children that are had on average by its members. So the conclusion is that we can slow population growth by improving access to education. Higher levels of education leads to a lower average number of children. Let's look through our answers. Parents who have many children often have difficulty paying for their children to be educated. That doesn't affect our cause and effect. It certainly doesn't strengthen it. Yeah, that's about finances, which is a little bit out of scope. B, on average, the more educated people are, the more knowledgeable they are about how to optimally rear children. So this one only works if the way to optimally rear children is to have less of them, which is not clarified. So this one it offers relevant information that doesn't affect the argument. C, it is not the case that the governments that do the most to promote education are also those that do the most to advocate having small families. So it is not the case that this plausible alternate cause is happening. What this answer says is that both of these things aren't caused by a third thing, at least this third thing. Both of these things aren't caused by like government intervention and like marketing. And so that does strengthen the argument because it removes another viable cause for the observed effect. D, children who are better educated tend to cause their parents less trouble than children who are less well educated. This is the opposite issue, if anything, because we aren't so concerned about the children and their effect on the parents, but the parents having the children. And E, people who have children as teenagers are more likely to drop out of school than and tend to have more children than people who start having children later in life. So this kind of strengthens, it seems like it's not clear enough about the effect that would have overall. Because how many of these people, it just says more likely. More likely than what? Like, is this enough to shift overall population metrics? So this one's a bit vague. It's in the right vein, but it's a bit vague. So I think I liked this one that removes the alternate cause. Having more children later doesn't. Yeah, it is not the case. So this argument is strengthened by removing a potential alternative cause. If this answer were negated, then that would weaken the argument by offering up another plausible reason for the effect. So the alternative cause was governments promoting both smaller families and education. So say the government was like, hey, you know, like you guys get educated, or they offered whatever. They offered a financial incentive for education. They could also offer a financial incentive for having small families. If they did that, then that would be reason to believe that both things were caused by the government doing the most, whatever form that takes, instead of the education causing people to have less children. And also, Dario, you had a question up here that I wanted to address about what about words when it comes to ratios and percentages over of. So here's what I will tell you about questions that involve ratios and percentages. Be careful that the answer and the question both are talking about the same thing, because they like to do what some of the professors here call mixed metrics. So they'll talk about like percentage changes in the question and then numerical changes in the answer, or vice versa. So that would be the main thing. I definitely wouldn't rule out any percentage or number change in an answer choice like solely based on that, but it is important that you match what the, I'm just saying what the answers are saying. Let's see here. All right, next example. Okay. How are we all feeling? Ready to do the breakdown? You guys did better on this than I thought. I picked this one because I thought it would be a little bit trickier, so it's exciting to see. So, let's work through it. Young children of parents diagnosed with issues related to attention are more likely to be themselves diagnosed with attention issues than are young children whose parents have not been diagnosed with such issues. While many have proposed that attention issues are caused by household environment and diet-related factors, this parent-child pattern clearly indicates that attention issues are traits that are passed on from parents to children via genetics. Which of the following, if true, most undermines the above conclusion? So here's our breakdown. Many have proposed that attention issues are caused by household environment and diet-related factors. But this author says that children of parents diagnosed with attention issues are more likely to be diagnosed with similar issues than our children whose parents haven't been diagnosed with attention issues. And their conclusion, instead of the popular conclusion, is attention issues are due to genetic inheritance, not diet or household factors. So, cause parents diagnosed with attention issues or genetic triggers than their children being diagnosed with attention issues, instead of the environment and diet-related factors. There are two important things going on in this one. The first one is, this is an example problem that I kind of engaged with, having a bit of experience because I have ADHD. But I will tell you that, and again, don't pre-think and then lock yourself out of good answers. Very important. But if you can engage with the material and bring your own interests and expertise to the problem in a way that doesn't tilt you into a bad answer, I think that can make the learning a bit more exciting. What do you guys think is the number one reason to get your child diagnosed with something? Because I have opinions, and they are this. Taking them to a doctor. So if your parents, my immediate thought was, if your parents have an attention disorder, then they are far more likely to take you to a doctor to be diagnosed. Diagnosis doesn't mean only diagnosed people have attention disorders, but it is a process that you have to go through. So that was my immediate thought. Second, anytime an argument does something like this, where it says, hey, other people think the causes are these things, but I don't. I think the cause is this. By bringing in those other causes, that can be a clue, because there's definitely a different example problem that I don't know if it's a TTP example problem or not, but I read one that was like, hey, people say that socialization is what prevents Alzheimer's, but I know it's really exercise. And then it was like, the higher the exercise of this study group, the lower the chance of Alzheimer's later on. And then one of the answers was, these people get their exercise through team sports, like soccer, where you would socialize. So anytime it brings up, hey, other people think this, but they're wrong, and actually the cause is this, be careful that you're factoring that in, because probably and in the case of this problem, I believe that's what they do, probably why they're bringing up these alternate causes is because it's going to come back into play. So, which of the following, if true, most undermines the above conclusion? Most young children live with one or both of their parents and share the parents' eating habits. Exactly. They have brought up this other thing. Oh, well, it's not the diet, it's not the household factors, but most children live with their parents. So they would be experiencing to some degree the same diet and household environment factors. So I think it's this one. B. Research has not identified a clear causal connection between indoor pollution and diagnosis with attention issues. This is a related but ultimately irrelevant answer, because I think we're supposed to take indoor pollution as the same as household environment, but the connection is not clear enough. So that one's not super helpful. Many parents of children diagnosed with attention issues were diagnosed with attention issues as adults rather than as children. This one was the most popular on my stats. Answer C. But here's why it doesn't work. Or here's why I think it's interesting to people. I think it reflects the real world, because specifically with this sort of thing, diagnoses are increasing. They've been increasing my whole life. So they weren't so popular when I was young, and then as I've gotten older, more and more people have been diagnosed. So this is probably like a lot of adults. I was diagnosed as an adult. A lot of adults are diagnosed with attention issues, and then they may get their children diagnosed once they know what signs to look for. But it doesn't matter if the parents were diagnosed as adults or children for them to be passing this on to their children. That doesn't have a clear effect on the argument. They were diagnosed, it is established in the past. And then their children are also more likely to be diagnosed. So this one offers background info to support a premise that we don't need because we already have the information we need from the prompt. D, the percentage of children diagnosed with attention issues has been increasing, even as the presence of some household environmental hazards such as lead has been decreasing. Very similar deal here. This offers information that's related to the argument, but it doesn't affect the argument. So up here it says, while many have proposed that attention issues are caused by household environment and diet-related factors, they are not specifying lead. They aren't even specifying hazards. That's an assumption that we could make, that they are hazardous, but it could be like, oh, while many have proposed that attention issues are caused by household environment, like extra sunlight, good like south-facing windows, they don't specify hazards, so this relationship is a stretch. And then E, there is, among experts, much disagreement regarding which methods for solving attention issues are most effective. We aren't talking about solving attention issues. We are talking about diagnoses. So this one is further down the line than we are in the process. We are at the diagnosis stage, and this is at the solution stage. We are not there yet. Let's look at our answer. So yeah, basically, these children would share the same environment as their parents. So this doesn't remove that. It doesn't undercut that other cause and effect. So it has introduced these alternate cause and effect potential causes and then said that they are wrong, but it does not clearly show that they are wrong, is what we got going on here. All right, let's do this one. Actually, on that last one, many parents of children diagnosed with attention issues were diagnosed with attention issues as adults rather than as children. So if it was, all that's saying is that like people were diagnosed as adults, if it said that people were diagnosed after their children were diagnosed, that would weaken the argument because it would show that the cause and effect might be flipped, that like the children might get diagnosed and then their parents decide to get diagnosed as well or decide to look into it. But all it says is that parents were diagnosed as an adult, not that they were diagnosed after their children, so they could have easily been diagnosed and then later had children and then had their children looked at as well. So that's why it doesn't flip, which is I think what you're asking about. How are we feeling about the Beethoven example? All right. I never know which examples are going to be the most divisive, because I would not have guessed this one would be as divisive as it's going to be. So let's see. As Ludwig van Beethoven began to go deaf, his hearing became such that he could hear lower notes better than he could hear higher notes. Interestingly, at that same time, in composing music, he chose to use notes that were lower on average than the notes he had used before hearing began to deteriorate. It seems likely that the reason for the change in his choices of notes was that he was gravitating toward using the notes that he could hear better given the state of his hearing, which is the following, if true, adds the most support to the hypothesis articulated above. So, premise: as Beethoven began to lose his hearing, there was a period where he could hear lower notes better than he could hear higher notes. And during the same period, he chose to use lower notes on average in his compositions than he had used before he started going deaf. So the conclusion is that the change in his choice of notes was due to him gravitating towards the lower notes he could hear better than his previously favored higher notes that he could no longer hear as well, or cause increasingly limited hearing range, and the effect is composing with the notes that he can hear better in that new range. So let's look at our choices. A, by holding a pencil in his mouth and touching it to the piano, Beethoven could feel the vibrations of low notes that he was playing as he composed. This answer seems to, I guess, further support the first premise that he could hear lower notes better than he could hear higher notes. It's not really relevant, but I think it's supposed to work like that. I think it's supposed to support our premise, but we don't need our premise supported. It has the information we need right there in the passage. So this one's not super helpful. B, because he was concerned that his musical career could be damaged if people were aware that he was losing his hearing, Beethoven did his best to keep the deterioration secret. Whether or not people knew at the time, that doesn't affect our cause and effect relationship. It is just about how his hearing was deteriorating and then his compositions altered in their makeup as a result. So this one isn't super helpful. C, when, after becoming almost completely deaf, Beethoven was forced to compose without hearing his compositions, he used notes that were on average as high as those he had used when his hearing was normal. So Beethoven is composing with a typical range of notes, and then he starts losing his hearing and he has half hearing, or however it works. And so because he has partially lost his hearing, he can hear a different range of notes better than another range of notes. His hearing is no longer level. He starts favoring the notes that he can hear better. But when his hearing is gone and his hearing is level again, even though it's at 0, and he can hear all notes equally again, in that he cannot hear them at all, he reverts to using higher notes again, as high as those he had used when his hearing was normal. So when the cause that is suggested, his limited hearing range, is removed and his hearing is once again even across the note board, then the effect, his lower noted compositions, is removed. So that does strengthen the argument. D, one of the first signs that Beethoven's hearing was deteriorating was buzzing in his ears that interfered with his hearing relatively high notes clearly. So we actually already know that he could hear lower notes better than he could hear higher notes, because it is stated here in this first sentence. So this one does the same sort of thing where it supports a premise with information, but we don't really need it supported. And E, Beethoven was able to compose without hearing what he was composing because he had played and composed music for many years before his hearing began to deteriorate. Same sort of deal. We already know that he was composing as he was going deaf and after he was going deaf, according to this one. But we don't need to know that he was still able to compose. It says right here in the passage he was composing. Look. Yeah. When the cause was removed and Beethoven could no longer hear any notes, the effect no longer occurred, and he resumed composing with notes in the higher range that he had preferred when he could hear all notes more equally. So by removing the cause and showing that the effect no longer followed, the argument is strengthened. Okay. I believe we have one more. Give you guys a couple minutes. All right. How are we doing on time? Okay. In seeking to determine the cause of extreme social anxiety, a condition characterized by extreme fear of being in certain types of social situations, researchers tested people experiencing such anxiety for biological markers. The researchers concluded that the cause of extreme social anxiety is an above average level of the chemical serotonin in the brain, because they found that one biological marker that consistently appeared in people who experience extreme social anxiety was brain levels of serotonin higher than the average brain level of serotonin of people who do not experience such anxiety? Which of the following, if true, most seriously weakens the support for the researcher's conclusion? So researchers tested some people who are experiencing severe social anxiety for various biological markers, and the one marker that consistently showed up in people with extreme social anxiety was elevated levels of serotonin relative to people without social anxiety. So the cause of the extreme social anxiety is an elevated level of serotonin in the brain, and here's our cause and effect. Elevated serotonin levels lead to extreme social anxiety. Let's look at our answers. When people who have experienced extreme social anxiety are coached to less fearfully handle types of social situations that they have feared, their brain serotonin levels fall. So, what this example is saying is that when people are coached to overcome their social anxiety through like therapy, then their levels of serotonin fall, which implies that the opposite relation to the stated relationship is true. Sequencing error, it's called. So, as in this case, their extreme social anxiety might be causing their brain serotonin levels to be higher as opposed to the serotonin levels causing their extreme social anxiety. So this one does weaken the argument. B, when people who experience extreme social anxiety take medications normally used by people experiencing heart disease, they experience reductions in severity of symptoms. This is similar to the other one, timeline error. So we're not talking about treating social anxiety, we're talking about what's causing it. Treating it comes up later. So this one is dealing with the wrong part of the process. C, a person's level of serotonin can be affected by various factors, including diet and the amount of physical activity in which the person engages. Okay, so even whether this is true or not, elevated levels of serotonin can still cause extreme social anxiety. And that's a good test to check on things like, if this is true, what is the effect on the argument? If it is not true, what is the effect on the argument? If it is the same either way, then it's probably not information that can strengthen or weaken the argument. So yeah, no matter what is affecting the levels of serotonin, it could still be that the serotonin is causing extreme social anxiety. D, some people who experience extreme social anxiety at one point in their lives do not experience it later in their lives. All the argument is saying is that when they tested people who were currently experiencing extreme social anxiety, they had elevated levels of serotonin in their brains. So they are not saying that they will always have elevated levels. They're not saying that people who experience social anxiety will always do so. So this one does not help us because it doesn't dispute a claim that was made. It has no effect on the argument. And E, the elevated levels of serotonin in people who experience extreme social anxiety are limited to one particular area of the brain. This is also not helpful because that could be true or false and it would have no different effect on the argument. I don't know, maybe that's the only part of the brain that the serotonin affects at all. Maybe everyone only has serotonin in one area of their brain. So this one doesn't have a clear effect on the argument either. B, does it not weaken? Me implies it's more related to heart. So let's look at these. How is C answer different than the example where the parents' behaviors? Oh, we'll get back. So, B, does it not weaken heart disease medicine resolving social anxiety? Can be implied that it is more related to heart than serotonin in the brain. It certainly could be implied that that is the case, but it's too much of a narrative that we as the audience would have to spin. So it doesn't say that. If it had a qualifier that said that, you know, heart health or something is another potential cause, then it might work. But all it says is that people who experience extreme social anxiety take heart disease, they experience reductions in severity of symptoms. It is just not clearly enough related. We've got to be able to see all the steps of the logical process. So that's why B's effect isn't clear on the argument. It's too vague. Any other questions? Awesome. Okay. And then Dario, you had a question about the earlier example, I think, where we can go look at that again. So, for C, let me see here. Many parents of children diagnosed with attention issues were diagnosed with attention issues as adults rather than as children. How, I guess, does that weaken the argument? Because I could see kind of the timeline thing I was talking about, that you could take it as the children got diagnosed first and then the parents were diagnosed, and that would weaken the cause and effect argument. Maybe, honestly, it would still hold, because it's just saying genetics. It's not saying that the parents getting diagnosed is triggering the children to get diagnosed. It's saying that the parents having the disorder as assessed by them being diagnosed is leading to the children having the disorder. So that's why that one doesn't weaken the argument clearly. And then the correct answer was A on the social anxiety. Let's go all over. Yep, sorry. This answer offers a reason to believe that the cause and effect relationship is reversed, because they are being coached to, they are addressing their social anxiety separately, and then their serotonin levels are falling. Dario, I'm not 100% clear on your last question. If you could rephrase it. Sometimes I don't understand the alternative. I do it by one. So, Silvio, good point. Like, rule them out as you can is a way better way to get the correct answer than trying to pick the best answer because it's the best. I think, like, if we have a decent reason to rule them out, and that's why I like to go through each one, because some of the answers will be pretty strong and some of them will not be that strong, but they will still be the best choice available. AP, is that one on the last question? Okay, let's see. So it's because the relationship is reversed, because they are altering the effect, the extreme social anxiety, and then the cause is altering accordingly, and that implies that the sequencing is wrong. That this, in the argument, the serotonin is causing the extreme social anxiety, but what A says is when we take away the effect, the cause also falls, which implies that the cause and effect are switched. And then B could work if heart disease, a third variable, caused both an increase in serotonin and anxiety. Yes. So if it did, then that would be introducing a plausible other cause. But because the heart disease medication only affects the symptoms of the effect and not the cause, then it doesn't work. But you're right. If they were like, hey, the heart disease is related to both, and it might be like causing both, then that would be introducing a valid third factor. But in this case, it does not affect both. So very good point. Any last words of advice for someone taking the GMAT in less than a week? I would probably just try to take care of yourself and sleep, because at this point you've learned quite a bit of what you're going to learn, and being relaxed will do a lot more good. Like being well rested will do you more good on test day than anything. Okay. I usually disclose this up front, but I did not. The first two were medium level, so that was, I have notes. The one about the fireworks laws and the one about the Zidanians' refined sugar laws. So those two were medium, and the last four were hard. Any other questions for us? Okay, I am, because I'm thinking about it, hold on. I'm going to drop my email in here, and that way, if you guys have questions, then you can just email me, or if you want me to, sometimes people like to get the list of the questions that I used, and so I will. Reading comprehension is, so cause and effect come up a lot in reading comprehension. It's one of the standard formats. You want to, as you read, you want to be able to get like a good idea of the story of the passage. So something basic that you can cut down to about a sentence that encapsulates the overall vibe of the passage. And you also want to be able to read and like get an idea of the structure. So say it's like 3 paragraphs, and the first paragraph introduces something, like the classic one that they love is like, that is hilarious. The classic structure that you run into a lot is like, the first paragraph will be like, hey, people believe this thing. People believe this nonsense myth, and they're wrong, and here's why. And then the second paragraph will be like, further details on why what I think is true. And then the last paragraph will be like, my conclusion is that even though people believe this myth, my evidence from the second paragraph is that the myth is a myth, and that the real answer is this. So that you want to be able to read a passage and get that information. So you want to be able to read the passage, get the simple story as you're going, kind of see the relationship between the sentences, see the relationship between the paragraphs, and then by the time you've read it through once, hopefully, have that in mind, because it'll help you find answers way quickly if you have an idea of the primary purpose, which they will ask you about, but also if you have an idea of the structure, because they'll ask you about the structure, but it will also help you like remember where things are. And that you are only going to get by reading a lot of stuff. So there's not really a good trick to it, because you just have to read until you're good enough at reading a lot of stuff. And there's not a super fast way to get there. Here is my email here for these. How to study for data insights. I did all the lessons and now I don't know how to get better. Lessons were straightforward. Kind of a similar thing in that, and I totally relate, because that was my experience doing like the OG stuff when I started, where I was reading lessons. I was like, cool. Like, I totally see what's going on here. And then I would like try to apply the lessons and it was not helpful to me. That it was clear when I was reading it, but it wasn't clear to the degree that it needed to be for me to apply the lessons. So on data insights, it's good to get an idea from the lessons, especially about like, there's one that talks about a bunch of different charts and like what kind of things they're used to show. And I think that that's really helpful, because just getting a basic idea of how people typically present information helps us kind of fall into the right mental headspace when we see that kind of chart. But otherwise, you just kind of have to practice reading the graphs, and you will get better if it's the graph sort of thing. Two-part analysis, I would definitely say looking at the answers is what helped me the most, because I kept not doing it, and then I would get like an entirely too specific answer or waste a bunch of time or be like, I don't know how I'm supposed to do this in 2 minutes. And a lot of times like the answers have clues in them to give you an idea of like, do you need to use the calculator, that sort of thing. And so what makes data insights hard is that the questions are very different from each other, and they throw a bunch of information at you, and the skills you have to develop are about like getting an idea of what's going on and then reading the question and being able to find the relevant information quickly. Off topic, but since you got an 805, do you have any tips to improve a weak quant? So write down everything. That's actually my general advice. Just write down everything while you're studying. It is slower, but that way you're kind of holding yourself accountable, because you will like think that you're going to follow things clearly and that you will remember, and you won't. And so write down every step of your calculations, and then if you get it wrong, go back and find where you fell off. Like, did you make a basic math mistake? Like, was your handwriting sloppy? And that way, if you go through every step, then you can see exactly the point at which you're falling off, and if it's the same thing. Like, you're reading too quickly, you're missing keywords, you're doing math mistakes, then you know to slow down, write more neatly or whatever the case may be. But with quant, like with verbal, you can kind of just work the question indefinitely. The end isn't so clear, but with quant, the end is clear. You get to an answer, and if it's wrong and you don't have good notes, then it's harder to see the pattern of like why you're getting it wrong. So like, are you using the wrong approach versus are you making careless math mistakes? The solutions are different. And for that reason, writing things down is a great way to track and see like where you're hung up. But yeah, otherwise just you have to learn a lot of quant things, and then you also have to be able to apply like the quickest method for you, and that just takes a bit of practice and learning a lot of the methods. So yeah, I would try not to, the math on the GMAT isn't hard, but there's a lot of it, I guess. So I would just try to kind of keep practice. I will also say though, and I know another person at TTP that like is a teacher here had the same experience. when I went in and did my focus, and I did it in like May, I think. And so the focus was the only choice by February, and I took mine in May. So I took mine really early, and then one of the teachers at TTP took his like a couple months ago, and so still kind of early, but not as early as me. And I would say that we both had the same experience where the quant was not as hard as we were expecting. And so I wasn't feeling like 100% on quant. I never had extra time on quant, like ever, on any TTP test, on any of my mocks. Like I was using all the time, and like on the tests I did have some extra time. So, you know, I didn't feel super confident. I felt like I would do okay, but I would say quant or DI were usually like my lowest scores on my mocks, and it was just much easier in the exam. So if you're feeling a bit discouraged, I also felt a bit discouraged, and it turned out okay. So hopefully that will be your experience. Otherwise, yeah, it is a lot to learn for sure. Does solving OG and OG review questions in depth are enough for the 705? So, I mean, solving questions in depth, if they mimic the writing level, would be the main thing. That, if you can really consistently like break down arguments, then yeah, I mean, you can solve LSAT questions. A lot of people do that. It's the skills are the same. The main thing about some of the GMAT prep is that it shows you what the priority is. So it kind of emphasizes that the point of the verbal isn't good English speaking. It's that your reasoning skills are strong, and that's kind of the focus that you want to have going in. But yeah, if you can solve like the OG questions in depth consistently, then I mean, that's what you're going to be doing on the exam. So it's the same sort of thing, maybe a bit more against the clock, but you know, the skills are the same. Let's see here. CR questions, strengthen the argument is the most common. I would say like strengthen, weaken, and assumption, that's going to be most of it. And then the niche stuff will be like less likely to run into evaluate the argument, which is the ones with like the questions usually, or method of reasoning, but you'll probably have like one or two. So it's good to get familiar with them, because I think that's where a lot of people mess up. Like they'll drill strengthen because that's going to be like maybe like 20 or 30% of the CR questions you run into. But then it doesn't take that much for the harder questions to throw you off. And so the ones that are based on like assumptions are very common. And then the wackier ones like method of reasoning, they're less common, but it's still good to go through them. But there's also like on this, I'm going in order, and on the webinars, I'm going like in order of the course. And I think the order of the course kind of reflects how frequently the questions come up, if that's helpful. Let's see. Any other? So as far as like finding the right method to solve the question, that's the biggest quant issue, I think. Because with the critical reasoning, a lot of times like the method is clear, you know, you read through it, you break down, like with reading comp even, like the method is clear. What are you going to do? You're going to read the passage. And then you're going to go through the questions and see what you can do. But with the quant, like finding the right method can be really overwhelming, and you have to do it so fast. So taking the 6 mocks, I think, is the best way to get a feel for how quickly you can like pick a good method, execute the method. And then going to, if you have like questions that you get wrong, and look at the ones you got right just in case it was a fluke, But if you go through like GMAT Club, you can like look at the questions from your mocks because they are also retired, and then see how people solve them and see if there's like a better way. Because I think that that's the main thing. It's overwhelming at first. That was a big thing that I had to get over. But the 6 mocks will typically like drill into you that you can do it. And then just looking at people's solutions and seeing like the different ways in which they solve things. There's more than one right way to do things, but you have 2 minutes, so you probably want like the way that you prefer. And that might not be the way that everyone prefers. But if it's on GMAT Club, then someone has tried it a few different ways, and you can kind of look through and see which way you like, and then work through it like that. And the more that you practice, you know, being faced with a random question and then selecting a method, executing the method, getting the right answer, the more confident you will be with that. Let's see. In the TTP platform, should we do all the tests in the chapter or just achieving the accuracy result? So it kind of depends. I did, when I started prepping, I was doing the old GMAT. So there was a whole long chapter on geometry that they do not cover on the focus. And that chapter had like so many tests. It had like 10 easy tests, 10 medium tests, and like 10 hard tests. And I did not do them all because that is too many. Sorry, 6 like mock exams, not 6 months. But yes, always take all of your mocks. Anyway, the accuracy result is helpful, but you know like how you feel about things. There was also the work problems. There was like a ton of practice exams for that. And I don't think that I did all of them. I think I did like, you know, 4 out of 8 of the mediums and like 4 out of 8 of the hards. But you know, like if you're doing them and you're like, okay, I consistently get this, like I see what's going right, I see what's going wrong. It's better to kind of trust yourself. And I know like on the TTP hard exams, like especially the later ones, some of them, like that would just be all I could do that day. Like 1 or 2 of those and then reviewing them, that they were just very, very challenging. And so there were some that I was like, hey, I'm going to put this on the back burner. I'm going to come back to it. If it's an issue, I will have these other practice tests. But I'm not going to like do this, only these practice tests for the week. But I would say if there's only like a couple at every level, I would go ahead and just do those, because practicing the problems is, you're going to be solving problems on the test. It's a good thing to practice. But you do not have to do like every single test every single time if you don't think it's helpful. How closely do the questions on the TTP test match the difficulty of the actual exam? I would say, oh, sorry. I missed a couple. GMAT Club is a website that you can go to, and they have like practice questions, and they hold like interview prep stuff. It's just like, it's a free website that you can go to, and you will find it when you review the questions on your mocks, because you can just like search the question stem, you know, and not even the whole thing, but type as many words and it will show up, and then someone will have posted it, and then there will be, it's like a forum. So someone will have posted the question, and then people below comment with their solutions and like the methods that they solve. But anyway, I didn't really know about it until I was reviewing my mocks, but that is, you will run into it. How many months did I study? It took about 9 or 10 months. It was about 500 hours on TTP for me to study, plus like the mocks. And then how closely do the questions on the TTP test match the difficulty of the actual exam? It's kind of like what I said earlier. Some of the hard questions on the quant for sure were harder than anything I ran into on the actual exam, but they weren't harder. The mock questions, like the official questions, were also like a bit harder than anything I ran into on my actual exam. And some of it might just be, you know, I was pretty like, I tried to relax before I took the exam. It was kind of the end. I went to a testing center, and I feel like that helped me, because it was very like, this is for testing, like mentally it put me in the right testing headspace. So there's a lot of factors, but I would not say that I ran into any questions, like official questions, that were so hard that they were like obviously harder than TTP questions, because some of the TTP questions are super hard. But yeah, you're not going to have that many questions on the exam. It's like 20 for quant, maybe 21, 20 for DI, and 23 for verbal, something like that. Anyway, that's just not that many. And so it kind of depends on how lucky you are a little bit. And they also won't give you like a bunch of hard questions in a row because you wouldn't have enough time to solve them all. Whereas TTP will 100% give you 15 ridiculous hard questions in a row. Like you wouldn't even see 15 hard questions on any of your exam sections because there's a cap of how many hard questions they'll give you. And so that itself can make it feel like easier. Any other questions? Do you think I can go from a 450 MOT to 680 in 2.5 months with TTP? Commit full time. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky on the mocks, especially if like you took one early. Because I took mine at the end, so my mock scores are like kind of skewed. I didn't take like the baseline mock. But doing the first mock is so, even like the first two, there's so much adjusting to the test that it does give you information. Like it gives you a baseline score, and that is helpful. But it isn't everything. Like I said, there's like 20 questions a section. It's just not going to be comprehensive. And so you have to kind of understand that you are adapting to the test as well as the material. And that kind of like skews your mock scores, the early ones, a little bit lower, I think. And also like you just will get more confident. Like you will get more comfortable and mentally like more prepared to knowledge-wise approach the test, but also like feeling okay about it, whereas early on you're just not going to feel that way. And so yeah, do I think that like people could see just dramatic score improvements? For sure. My lowest mock I think was like 615. I got an 805. And again, I took my mocks at the end, like I had already done the TTP course. So it's not like I had one where I hadn't done the course. But it's just like there's so much of an adjustment that can skew things. If you apply yourself and you really like understand the concepts, and that can take different times for different people. Like I said, it took me like a while to study because I was working the whole time. And so I only could study like when I wasn't working. That's vastly limiting. A lot of people do this like full time, or like have like a different kind of job than I did where they have a lot more free time. And so people learn at different speeds, and people, you know, they have different amounts of free time. They have different amounts of like mental energy to study. And yeah, if you're doing it full time and like you're taking care of yourself and you're exercising and like you're sleeping enough and you're doing, you know, you're not just like slamming Monster energy drinks and hoping for the best, then like I do think you could see dramatic improvements. And I would not, the diagnostic, it's supposed to be a diagnostic. It's not supposed to be like a box that you feel trapped in, you know? So lots of people get low diagnostic scores, and just getting more familiar with the tests can be a huge game, or a huge game changer. And then as far as my early on diagnostic, the only one I did was like the TTP one, and then some practice questions on, some practice like OG questions, but not in the format of a mock. So those were not helpful to like translate to a score. But I did the TTP diagnostic, and I think I got like a 66%. Any other questions? I think we're Yeah, data insights, it's just it's really just like practicing and kind of like reading comp. A lot of it is you don't have to, you can't get familiar with all of the information. You just don't have time. Like, you don't have time to memorize everything, but it's all there for you. So the real balancing trick is like telling what information you do need to familiarize yourself with to solve the question quickly. And a lot of that is just like structure things. So if you can see like how things are laid out so that when the questions come up, you know roughly where to look, I think that that's very helpful. And then of course, just practicing like sorting the tables and everything, because a lot of it is practice and a lot of it is just like knowing what data you need to learn and knowing what data you just need to have like a rough idea so you can find it. All right. Anything else? Okay. Yeah, the course is long. I will fully say that, like, it is totally long. I did the whole thing, and I would say that that made me feel better that it was kind of long, because I was like, surely, like, I got to the end of the TTP course, and I was like, if this isn't enough, then, like, I just can't prepare anymore, because I spent so much time on it. And, like, there was like review parts, but it is super long, and you don't have to do all the parts if you don't feel like they're helpful. Sometimes people like to pick and choose. I am not that way. I am very much like a completionist when it comes to academia, and so I wanted to do everything, and even I didn't do like all of the tests. But yeah, chipping away at it, kind of seeing where your strengths are, that's also something that comes with practice. So I am going to, let's see. Oh, the most common quant topic. So that's a little bit harder because the verbal topics are more like clumped together, like very popular, like not as popular. You might not see them at all. Quant, I would say, like, because of the way the topics like build on each other, it's much harder to tell. But obviously there's going to be a lot of just, algebra and work problems. I would say that if you can do your quadratics and stuff, if you're like pretty comfortable with just like, I don't know what the term is, but just like straight math where you just work through problems, and you're pretty decent at like crafting equations from word problems, I think that that's a lot of it. And then of course combinations and permutations and probability, I think, come up a fair amount. But on the quant, there's less questions than verbal. There's more topics it covers, and just some of it is going to be random. So if I would go through and like make sure that you're comfortable with the topics, but you can also maybe just like check and see how frequent they are. And that might, like, if you just hate doing something and you're not getting anything out of it and it makes you mad, and you check and it's like a 1% likelihood that it'll show up on the exam, you might decide to be like, hey, I'll just take that risk. But only you can make that choice for yourself. Okay. I think that was everything. You guys have my email if you guys think of any questions or if you want to ask me anything. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Bye all.